Right, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, couple of technical issues, which, tech recruitment agency, so no surprises. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining here at Talenza's Neurodiversity Change Practice event. Just a quick housekeeping. So the women's bathrooms are just here on the right. The men's bathrooms are just on the right of the lifts. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Aurora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. So this idea arose from the change community at RBA, Suncorp, QBE and Westpac. So massive thanks, Rachel, Kate, Riley, Patrick, for all your support on this. Also a quick thanks to the Talenza team for making this happen. Kat and Bridie, who have basically done most of the work. So thank you both very much. As well as Dan, our co-founder, Jacob, who's our New South Wales State Director, Amy, New South Wales Financial Services Director, and our host tonight, James Holland, who's our Industry Director. And a big welcome to Joey Ballantyne, the founder of Grit and Grace Collective, everyone. A former management consultant, and Joey has spent over 20 years in a boom and bust cycle of work, not knowing why success seemed to come at such a personal cost. Through her life, she's experienced autistic burnout, and Jerry will share her insights into how change managers can better equip neurodivergent staff to adapt and transition to change. Welcome, Joey, everyone.
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for coming. Much appreciated. So that was AJ's introduction. Can we get an introduction from you? If you can tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thanks all for joining this afternoon. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to share my story. So, I'm one of the oldest change managers I know. I started change management in my early 20s, and I'm now in my late 40s. So when I first started on big projects, big transformation, I don't even think we knew that it was change management back then, but it is actually my core competency, and it took until I was probably in my early 30s we put a name to it, and so I'm amongst like-minded people and have very similar experiences to you from a work point of view. I did my undergrad in communications, public relations, and that actually has proven to be one of the most useful skill sets within any organisation, really, in any role that I've ever had. But I quickly did an MBA because I sort of undervalued the comms piece, but it is actually so much more important than necessarily the MBA. But one opened the door and then the other got me through. So I did a lot of transformation projects. I was with EY for a long time and a couple of other consulting firms and some contracting as well. But, I've worked on almost every type of change project, from technology to finance transformation, HR transformations, any sales, marketing, operations. Like, I was able to transcend a lot of different functions because the work that we do is very much about process rather than functions. And then I suppose the other thing about me is I've worked in a lot of different places. So I grew up in Canberra, in the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. And at about sort of 25, had to get out of there because there was nothing going on. Went to the UK for a few years, came to Sydney, worked here, met the beautiful Rach, probably like 10, 15 years ago. And then had the very unique opportunity to move to Washington, DC, and to lead a team in the Australian Embassy there, promoting Australian trade and investment. So I've been able to apply a lot of my change management experience in any leadership roles that I've had, but I've been everywhere.
Yeah.
Been around for a while.
And have to be careful. I'm not well versed on the political correctness of neurodiversity. So I don't know how many people in the room, and I won't ask because I don't know about the political correctness of it. But you found out quite late on about your diverse, you're neurodivergent.
Do you want me to help you out?
Yeah, please. So
You're doing well.
can you tell us a bit about your journey from there? So that was a journey up till then. What happened
absolutely. From there. In some ways, I'd like to say it's something, if you know, but it takes a long time, especially as a female. So I always felt like a bit of a square peg in a round hole, basically. I didn't feel like I fitted in. I felt like there must be some sort of manual that I missed out on, and that people knew how things worked especially from a social point of view, and particularly at work, how things should be done right. And I didn't. I seemed to sort of always feel like I had to put a lot more effort into the work and sort of reading the room. And so from that, I guess I had a number of burnouts over the years. So I would call them like little micro burnouts. Every week I was like, boom, and then every weekend I would bust. And I'd had that from like childhood, really, even during school. It turns out to be neurodivergence. So I've got a few slides, not quite yet, but to talk about like language. But neurodiversity is all of us, and the term neurodivergent is if someone identifies as having a difference from the norm. And when I say the norm, I mean that more in like a statistical manner. Yeah. Anywho, it's hereditary. So my nephew had been diagnosed as autistic, and my sister had a lot of experience. So when I had a lot of anxiety, which I'd had forever, as I started to question that, my sister would say, well, you might want to look at this DSM-5. And I'm like, the DSM-5, Google. But I think, when there are people in your family, which there typically are, eventually you sort of start connecting the dots. For me, I'm a bit of a slow learner, so it took a while. So I started Googling. I resonated with some of the articles. I started looking at my relationships, like my relationships at work, my marriage, and concluding, I was like, why do these things seem to be so hard? Like, I'm not wrong. I'm not broken, but I seem to feel like I am. And really, I think that's where you start. If you've got any question about your neuro profile, it's really good just to do some research and learn what some of those kind of experiences are. I'll go through it at a very high level, but because I'm not a medical practitioner, but Googling was really a good start, and just chatting with people. And then ultimately, I had a friend who was a psychologist that said, you need to come and see me. I can see lots of, things going on. So as a friend, she invited me around, and she had expanded her practice to do more neuro testing, because this is becoming so much more of a need, and it's really very difficult to find someone within, cooee of 6 months or 12 months. And I said, can you book me in? She said, yep. And so I went through the process, was clinically diagnosed autistic, and that's done by a psychologist. So just more broadly for ADHD, which again, I'll get into some of the terminology. If you wanted to get medication, you actually need a psychiatrist to do all of that. But for me, it was validating to have the report that, yes, there is something different, mostly because I wanted to say to my husband, see, I'm not broken. Like, I am just different.
Not what you called me.
Yeah, which is a bit sad, but we shoved him on. It's been part of the journey. But really in this general topic, it's really very acceptable, and that's what I love about it, is that you can just self-identify and self-diagnose. So I've got some people in my client base who don't want to go for an official diagnosis, others that do, and that's for all different reasons. And it's an incredibly unique set of experiences that neurodivergent people have, which makes it really hard to go, oh, okay, can you tell me whether I'm a neurodivergent person or not? Because if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've basically met one neurodivergent person.
Yeah.
We just come in all different shapes and sizes. So that led me to make a whole lot of changes. So yes, I left the husband. That was one of them. I left my big corporate job. I left sort of the big cities. I'm now back in Canberra, and I started this organisation that I call Grit and Grace Collective. It's about supporting mostly women, but I do have some male clients, not discriminating so much, but my signature program is a 12-week program for 12 women to effectively learn how to reframe these differences as superpowers, like find the superpower within the difference, to work smarter, not harder, so we don't get so much burnout, and to find a way of belonging without having to like fit into these, my gosh, like sorts of outfits I used to wear, the things I would do just to try and get that, 5-star rating at performance review time. Just like it just took it out of me. So now I pretty much work on my own, and I have like these wonderful clients that I get to spend time with, and then I get these wonderful opportunities. Like I've had a few of these opportunities where people just want to learn more about this topic. And I'm just one person. I'm not a medical practitioner, but I am someone who's had a really interesting career, and I've got stories to tell about how do you navigate professional success when your brain's wired a bit differently.
One of the questions we had, and I think you touched on it a little bit, was around the categories. What are the categories of
okay. So what I might do is, let's go into a bit of 101. Some people, this will be all well-known information, and I'm keeping it pretty high level, but don't want to assume anyone doesn't know this. So neurodiversity, as I said, is everybody. It's like the diversity of brains. So that's what neurodiversity is. And it's only ever relevant as a term for a group. So this is a neurodiverse group. I'm not a neurodiverse person. You're either a neurotypical person or a neurodivergent person. And 15 to 20% of the population is considered neurodivergent. So I think this is really key, especially for you guys in change management and even in life generally. There is a huge proportion of people, like in this room, there'd be a good 10 people if we include online, in our families, in our friendship groups. So I sort of was talking to AJ earlier, like I think of this as the final frontier of diversity and inclusion, because we've done gender, we've done, cultural backgrounds and ethnicity and all sorts of, sexual orientation, but it's our brains that are what comes to work, not the colour of my skin or, where I was born. And so I think because this is the largest proportion of diversity, and there are so many of us that are either, is that noise okay? Just press on. Then I think it's becoming so topical, and especially in change management and trying to implement changes into the way an organisation operates, then this is pretty key, because this is a huge proportion of your stakeholders. So, yeah, I'll jump across to this slide. So what do we mean by neurotypical and neurodivergent? I like this slide because it shows that a neurotypical brain patterns will be pretty consistent. They might be above average or below average or average, but they are sort of within 1 or 2 standard deviations of each other as it relates to sort of IQ scores. Whereas a divergent brain will have these peaks and troughs, like some things they're really good at and some things they're not really good at. And so neurodivergent, so we had on the previous slide, so you asked what are the different categories, etc. We've got things like dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and then there are a huge range of other conditions. I think there's about 74 different things in the DSM, and they are things that are either neurodevelopmental. I don't like using the word disorder. I use the word difference. It's just I don't tend to come at it from a deficit basis. It might be neurological. It might be learning patterns, like they could be difficulties, but they could also be strengths. They could be intellectual differences. So there's any number of different ways that a person's brain might peak and trough. I'm just using that. So I might be spiky on one thing, really good at you know, seeing patterns, and someone else might be really, really good at another form of IQ, but we're all different. So all our brains are different. It's just that the neurodivergent brain has more than sort of 2 standard deviations from the norm. So it makes it quite difficult to track, because we can all have a bit of everything. I think what I'd like to also get across is that we're not all a bit on the spectrum. There is a scientific definition or diagnosis or categorization that can come from any of those things that I described before, that was something that you were born with. Or there's also others, some schools of thought that will say that it can be an acquired neurodivergence, so post-traumatic stress, especially complex post-traumatic stress, or brain injury can actually cause a change to neurology as well. So we're not all a bit on the spectrum, but if you are neurodivergent, you usually then, when you know, you're like, oh, now I know, like, oh my goodness, why didn't I know this earlier? We'll just jump to the third and final slide, because I want to talk about this concept of spectrum. I've only used a few really simple diagrams, try and just fast track, what I'm saying. But the spectrum is not low and high, as in we're not a little bit autistic or a little bit ADHD. It's more like a wheel where there are a number of different core characteristics that I might be high on or low on. And so my version of high and low in this radar diagram will be different to any of yours. This is a bit of a clunky diagram. I really like it because it's just so simple, but just finishing off on kind of some of this 101 that I think is really important to recognise as change managers is that it's like a layering effect. So at the very core of my personality, there are some core characteristics about the way that my brain is wired. And there may be some co-occurrence. So there's quite a few people who are autistic and ADHD, or dyslexic and autistic, and I'm dyspraxic as well as autistic. Dyspraxic being basically clumsy, but a very definite form of clumsiness. So there can be quite a few co-occurring conditions that are just core to that person's identity. Why this is a little clunky is that some of that stuff, like noise sensitivity or any form of sensory sensitivity, is a core characteristic. Whereas the next layer that neurodivergent people are facing is one of, and co-occurring. So they might have a couple of co-occurring conditions and then their core. And then you have the coping mechanisms. So fidgeting might be a coping mechanism. Stimming can be a coping mechanism. Being socially distant might be a coping mechanism, or itching and scratching, like getting frustrated or angry would be more of a coping mechanism than actually what's core. So those meltdowns that we talked about earlier, they're not that person's identity. They are something that is as a result of the core stuff. So when we're dealing with people under stress, those coping mechanisms, I've got a few others like fidgety, distracted, being antisocial or overly social and people pleaserish, frustrated, anger, fixated on things. If people are under stress, then those coping mechanisms will sort of start to show up a lot more. And so change is inherent. Usually is a stress situation that you all are implementing. So it's incredible. Like, I think this discussion is going to be so important, especially afterwards, just about, the implications of the work that you do is so much more acute for neurodivergent people.
Is there any cheat mode in terms of, it works, stakeholders being neurodivergent? Is there any telltale signs of, this person is this, so, I might be able to do that? And trying to be neuro-inclusive.
Neuro-inclusive, yeah. So I want to tell you 2 tips. I think it's problematic to try and sort of label people. I would be taking any filters off altogether and just think about neurodiversity when you go to think about change, because every one of these brains are different and your ways of processing information are all different. So I think starting from that base is probably a better starting point. But there are sort of two key things that I thought would be really useful to share. So the first one is the concept of best practice, right? So we've all heard of best practice. We try and aim for best practice. So best practice is best practice for everybody. Good practice is pretty much good practice for everybody. But bad practice, loose practices, inconsistent practices, opaque practices are really triggering for neurodivergent people. So all this is making sure we stay above the line of good practice. But notice that if we design strategies or execute our tactics in a way that are a bit sloppy, that will be acutely felt by someone who is neurodivergent. What it will do is it'll create a confusion. So confusion sets in. We're pretty much confused all of the time, but that's sort of like, it gets worse. The confusion then leads to frustration. The frustration then leads to anger. The anger then leads to distress, and then the distress leads to like burnouts or stress days off and like basically a drop in productivity. So if you see that dominoes falling, it's like, it's really, really important to commit to pretty good practice. That would be my first sort of piece of advice about sort of strategy and going into it. And sort of how are this particular segment of our workforce kind of experiencing the world. The second one, and this might be a bit harder to necessarily tie exactly to change management, but it ties into workplaces in general, is the sensory sensitivities. So we've got our 5 senses of sight, smell, taste, touch, and the other S. And then there's this thing called interoception, which is, can you feel what's going on in your body? That can be very low for neurodivergent people, forgetting to eat, forgetting to go to the toilet, forgetting to go, not knowing what emotion they're feeling. And proprioception, I've got it written down. Proprioception, I'm just sort of also getting some of this stuff myself, which is, the physical environment around. And so as you think about your change management strategies, are there things that you are doing that might be triggering some of those sensory sensitivities? So for example, in this type of room, everyone's sort of sitting pretty close, pretty settled, but a neurodivergent person might find it too crowded. These are nice lights. These might be a bit hard to cope. The sitting for a whole hour would absolutely be difficult. And so some people might be feeling that right now, and they'll just be masking those reactions so that they just and so that masking of like just fitting in is burning energy. So I will have like an energy hangover tomorrow, because I'll be like, right, well, this is obviously me putting myself out there. It's a pretty friendly audience, so it should be okay. But there's this domino effect, there's this implication that if we aren't neuro-inclusive and sort of open-minded to some of these new things that we're learning, then the risks are there. You've got people that are disengaged, they're resistant to the change. It's not because what you're implementing is bad, it's just the how we're doing it that can potentially be tripping us up. So I do have some tips. So
Need to know.
Need to know. Okay. So I'm sure none of you are doing this, but I tell you what, vague and nebulous and verbal narratives, like the storyline, if they're vague, that can be very, very challenging. So maybe what I'll do is combine, like, this is what not to do, and then this is why not to do it. So what I've experienced, I know for myself and all my clients, they're particularly literal and logical and black and white and concrete and specific. And I know in my time I've written some fluff in my comm strategies, you know, and you're right, the this is why we're changing, and you know, it was probably as nebulous as the day's long. But that sort of vagueness causes people with a really concrete mind a big disconnect, because they're like, what are you trying to say? Why don't you just say it more directly? So if you've got the courage and the support to be much more explicit and specific and literal, then that will be more easily received. Verbal is also not entirely awesome, because processing time and recall is difficult. There's nothing to reference back to. So written communication in specific form is a better way to at least develop your sort of communications strategies. So that's to the style of communication. I think that the second one that I've really noticed, and I used to wonder why I would pick a fight with my manager. I'd be like, oh, like on everything from, you know, what you're suggesting here, the impact it'll have on the people, or the process that you're following. You haven't even, like, these things don't add up. You know, if there's anything that's a bit out of kilter, a bit disconnected, we can get quite fired up. So there appears, if we peel it back, it appears to be a real correlation for neurodivergent people to be sort of very interested in what's right and what's true and fairness and justice, and they can get much more worked up. And when I say they, I mean I can get much more worked up about situations than most other people. They're like, it doesn't matter, like, it's no big deal. But there's this sort of visceral kind of importance placed on things. And like I said, it can be about the people, the impact on people, or for me, I'm a very process-oriented person. So for process, or say a strategy named 3 objectives on page 2 and then 4 objectives on page 5, like I pick a fight on that. I'd be like, what is it, 3 or is it 4? Like, which would never be a great, you know, sort of career enhancing move. But it seemed really important to me, even though it probably wasn't important to everybody. But I think the brains that neurodivergent people have can help tiny loose ends and get that good practice. Like, if you've got a neurodivergent person to run through any of your plans, comms, strategies, whatever, they'll find the holes and they'll find the opportunities in which to order that up. So so there is that sense that if you come across someone who's really, really fired up, it's probably because maybe the rationale for the change hasn't been really strongly articulated. Maybe it hasn't been fully truthful. I know that there's sometimes been situations where we couldn't tell everybody why a change took place, but I think that also became a bit of a business as usual, that you just kind of roll out the same, like, you know, wellbeing, productivity, or whatever the latest version of change is. Why not get to the actual real root cause? Because some of those peaks are really high levels of IQ, and they'll see straight through it. If you give them fluff, they'll just see straight through it. So you're better off being truthful. And then the other thing, which I think is relevant to kind of your entire stakeholder set, is that, you know, I'm out of the game for a while, so you guys might find this a bit dated, but we seem to segment stakeholders mostly by rank and role. Oh, we've got the executives over here, they'll get that message, and we've got the admin over here, they'll get that message, or we've got the people that perform this role across all the business units, we'll cluster them. But because we've all got different brains and different ways of processing, I think we can get a lot smarter with the way in which we segment the communication channels. So some people would absolutely love coming to this auditorium. You would bang, 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 give it to you in like 15 minutes and then you're out of there. But other people might be like, can we just receive it in a memo where it's clearly outlined and there's it's in a documented format. And we're never going to know whose preferred style of communication is. But I think if you could design the channels around a variety of different learning styles, and I might be sort of preaching to the converted, and give people the option to join whichever way it suits them, I think that's going to help everybody, because you know there'd be senior executives that are receiving some sort of executive briefing in a certain format that also might not suit them, because everybody's brain is different. So they're kind of like my three things: is that don't manage for the neurodivergent, manage for everybody, and the fact that everybody is diverse. And so when we want to communicate or teach, so if we're looking at, you know, your communication side, you've got your training programs, if that's the type of change program, then don't just roll out a 2-day like long thingamajig. You know, like a neurodivergent person doesn't have the attention span, they don't have enough time to process that. Maybe offer a range of different training styles and formats. So yeah, that was a long answer to to that question.
So in that scenario, definitely stick to the list of questions that we set out. Yeah. There's a couple of other questions that we have listed, but I might just ask you if there's anything from the presentation that you had that's worth noting before we go into.
Yeah, a bit of a Q&A. Yeah, it'd be good to hear from you all. Well, I think just rounding out that last comment about you know, managing for the diversity, and on top of that, that's about, I think what's really coming through, and actually this word apparently was like Merriam-Webster's dictionary word of the year last year, was authenticity. I think authenticity, like I said before, being truthful, being direct, kind of treating everybody as equals and adults, and like being real seems to be the prevailing preference for leadership style. I think it's still got a long way to go. I don't know if me and my lack of filter would get on well in the executive ranks anymore, but people seem to like the fact that I'm pretty authentic now, but that's because I just don't have the energy to mask as much. But authentic leadership, diversity of views, so getting different viewpoints across, you know, across what you're doing, and inclusion, like including different people in all parts of that end-to-end process of change. I think it's the D&I acronym, but it's in practice. And at an organisational level, I think this is a little bit more business as usual, but you'd really benefit from, and you're probably already doing it, is ensuring that middle management layer has skills to be neuro-inclusive in their leadership generally, because change is like the new, like it's normal now. You know, we barely, like there would all, you know, there's how many people in this room just managing change and helping to implement changes, because you know, the society and the world and opportunities and technology are moving so quickly. If we can equip kind of those key middle managers, the people that someone reports to, which is where the majority of our experience tends to be, is if we're working for someone like that, they're the person that informs our experience. And if they're good at recognising that every one of their 5, 10 or 500 staff are different, which is pretty complex skill set, then you all have change agents that can help, you know, I mean, it's neuro-inclusive leadership, I think, is that next skill set that is in demand. And I think it's going to be a good world when we get to that point.
And are neurodivergent getting through up into leadership?
Look, I think we're going to see more of it. We're seeing ads for jobs that are specifically targeting neurodivergent people. It can tend to be a little bit stereotyped, though, like security agencies or IT, when in fact there can be all sorts of skill set. I think it's less about the label, like we said before. Like, we're not going to hire for neurodivergence. We're going to hire for a diverse range of skills, and people that look at the world differently, that are prepared to say what they think, and other people that are prepared to hear what other people think. Like, I think what we're looking for is, you know, a broad range of brains that come to the problem, and then the skill set to be able to work together. So there is some research that says, like, neurotypical people work really well together and neurodivergent people work really together. It's like this sort of happy, dancy, mixy thing that's still, you know, all it requires is just being a good human and communicating and appreciating that there is so much value in difference.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll take questions. Just raise a hand. Joey can select who she wants to take questions from.
Rachel, yes. And this is my experience, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yeah, and it's really tough because it's so systemic, actually, and it's so specific to it comes back to culture, right? And culture is leadership, and then leadership is what you get in productivity. And so I think the first thing is really equipping leaders and managers particularly to be able to lead in an inclusive way, like to be comfortable having that conversation, to create psychologically safe environments. So that's a whole behaviour set and skill set. And then I think there's some levers that the HR teams can pull as far as that end-to-end journey that an employee experiences, everything from where you recruit and how you recruit. And then, like, job design, like how fixed you are with the job's design, or how flexible you can be with jobs, and then onboarding and engaging and performance managing and developing. I think there are policy and process opportunities along that end-to-end system. But I've got some clients whose organisations are saying the right thing in the processes and policies, but their experience with their manager is horrendous. And then I've got other clients who's got a really great manager because they lucked out, but it's not a huge priority for the system. So it's pretty big. It's a pretty big shift. And I don't encourage anyone to disclose unless they really feel very comfortable with their manager. I just don't think we're there yet. There's too many examples of people being discriminated and disadvantaged for having expressed that. Until we get the understanding up and the knowledge up, I think it becomes, and that's why mostly I do work with HR teams and with organisations, but my passion is to work with neurodivergent individuals, and how do they equip themselves to have a strong sense of self? How do they manage their energy better? Because I didn't really touch on it, but while our brain is doing something really, really different, so is our nervous system. So the body, when I talked about sensory sensitivities, the body's hit, whether by lights or by sounds or textures, or that the room's too cluttered, and that that can create real issues as well. So thanks, Rach.
Questions?
Yeah.
I was going to say, this to me is that's fine.
Well, I mean,
Who's in the room?
oh, that's right. So is it Jacob?
Yes.
Okay. Jacob asked if I could tell which organisations are doing this well. I can't really, because I'm not meeting enough of them. I can tell you a few that are doing it really badly. And I'm in Canberra, so there's a big proportion of public sector there. But I have been having conversations with, I think that where I'm seeing at least appetite and interest, but not a lot of action yet, Jacob, is in professional services. So legal firms, IT firms, consulting firms, usually big organisations that have teams that can really look at and think about this stuff. But I haven't seen a massive amount of traction yet. So I have them on my call list. Do you want to sponsor some people to come on our program, or can I do an information session? I've done quite a few information sessions, but I'm not in directly in that sort of consulting with lots and lots of organisations. So I couldn't really report back, reliably. But there's probably a big opportunity in how to adjust policies and practices and develop capability to bring, those that are prepared to do it up.
Do you think the psychological safety is the most important thing for organisations to get the best out of people?
I would have thought so. I haven't given it, I would have thought so, right? It seems crazy that we're there, right? We're at rock bottom. Could you just create a psychologically safe place so we can then go from there? Forget productivity, I look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I've applied that to the levels of ways in which you can, manage people. And it has to start with, there's even before psychological safety, there's some legal stuff that people need to ensure they're not, messing up.
Yeah.
But to get to real authenticity, I think that's authenticity is actualization in the pyramid, as far as I'm concerned, is that if everyone could be authentic and respectful, then we've hit the top of the mountain.
You just go back a bit. You talked about burnout and slow learning at the start for your individual. But is that common?
Yes.
What is burnout?
Yeah. Well, so let me go back to the slow learner. I don't know if I mentioned this, but 80% of women are diagnosed after the age of 18. So it's all late diagnosis. And when I was 45, 46, holy dooly, you look back on your life, you think, okay, what bit is me and which bit is the stuff that I've just learned along the way out of coping? And so burnout's exhaustion, but next level. It's bone weariness, tiredness that comes along with it, usually skill degradation. So you actually lose some skills. There was a point at which I thought, oh my God, I've gotten dumber. Am I ever going to be able to string a sentence together properly? But, I had to work through that recovery and my whole lifestyle is completely different now in order to manage the energy. So if we go back to all of that sensory sensitivity and all this masking, it just takes up energy, which is waste of energy as far as organisations are concerned. It's like goodwill that's just being flushed away. So yeah, for me it was just lots of sleeping and lots of disengagement and then sadness and then for some people it can last for a couple of years. For me, I think I did it in a very iterative process. Every weekend I would crash. But for example, I wouldn't say that my nephew, he's 13, has burnout, but just a standard week for him, he can't be at school every day, all day. So on a Friday, and thankfully he's got my sister as his mum because she's got so much experience with this, but on a Friday, he sleeps until he doesn't need to sleep anymore. That can sometimes go to midday. Yeah. And then he does his school day with my dad as a life skills, and they have to record what they do. So, but he's getting the most amazing experience. They build sheds or they restore tools or they plant gardens. But, he could go to lunchtime or even morning tea and then he has to go and sleep. He's got a lot going on. Like I said earlier, remember the co-occurring conditions. There can be multiple things. Could be physical issues, there could be disease, there can be mental issues, anxiety, depression. So when we look at neurodivergence, the core stuff is actually not that big a deal. It's when you layer all these other things that is when I think the burnout occurs, and the environmental impact.
And then people's thoughts around that, because that, I would think, other people might
Would judge.
see that as
Absolutely.
laziness or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever
Weakness.
it might be. Yeah.
Absolutely. So he's lucky to have my family, because I've got like the most inclusive parents ever, and my sister. But yeah, his self-esteem is going to continually need to be fostered and cultivated, because his experience, and that's why I don't like to say conditions and disorders. I think it's his experience of life is just very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the models I came across, which I really love, is looking at a job in terms. So if you've got a job, or if someone's got a job, that they're usually like presence work, where you have to be present, but that doesn't mean you have to be present in person, but you have to be on. Like, you've got to be there, you've got to be able to listen, and but you maybe don't want to do presence work all day long, like, because that can be really taxing. So you carve out that. Then you've got your process work, running through the emails, whacking those moles, signing off forms, stuff that's pretty routine and quick, but there's lots of it. And you could do that from a coffee shop, or you could do that from while you're on the open plan. Doesn't require a lot of mental kind of intellect. And then you've got your production work, and that's the stuff which is real deep work. You're creating, you're designing, you're problem solving, and that is where you need more quiet time. And so you might be in the office, but you get one of those rooms, or you might work from home, or you might work from a library. And so the types of places that you can work from are not just home and work either. I've worked from wine bars and coffee shops and a library, and my kitchen table versus my office. Like, I think there is a lot more flexibility that we have as individuals to match those three things, like the types of work and the different places. And so if we say people come back to the office, what does that actually mean? Does it mean 5 days, or does it mean on Tuesdays and Wednesdays? And I think I've seen it to be quite non-prescriptive. I don't know, because I'm not in corporate anymore, but I haven't seen a lot of like, you must be here from 9 till 5 and on these days. So, okay, I'm coming back to the office, but I'm going to come in on a Tuesday afternoon, all day Thursday and Friday morning, because that suits my work pattern. That's where I think the future of work is that people want to come into the office, but it's not within the context of I have to come into the office and that I just do whatever I have to do during that time. I pick what I'm going to do, because with all these beautiful rooms, like, I would absolutely come into the office to do some production work if I could get into one of those rooms, because that's much better than maybe my home office.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 bobs on that. Huh? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Okay, that's a hard one. And so just repeating back that there's no one size fits all of one person's neurodivergence, that we can be high in capacity one day, and so I can handle these lights because I've spent 2 days preparing for it, and I'll it'll be fine. But another day where my nervous system was more vulnerable, I could be lower. So I think it'd be very challenging to plan for that. I think if you can just go into your strategies, like you said, preparing ways in which people can engage with the change on a range of different ways, whether it's through verbal, written, experiential, get creative, and then just be open to the fact that some days it just doesn't work for people. But what you've done has already made it easier for them to potentially, yeah. I think we sort of have to still be practical. We can't really create an individualized change plan, but maybe there is something in an individualized change plan where people can opt in. You could put a survey, right, which sessions in what way, and then I don't know. I'd definitely give that a crack. But I think if you're leading inclusively, then it enables the person to get back to what they've got to do, which is manage their energy and manage their responses, where they're going to have a lot more capacity to do that if they're not in an environment that's already taking so much energy away from them. Well, she's a change maker, right? If she's being really open and yeah. Yeah. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Are you born with neurodivergence or can you acquire it? I'll tell you my just off the street kind of answer based on what I've learned, but it's not a technical answer. It seems to me that there are some versions rather than conditions or disorders that you are genuinely born with. I don't think you acquire autism. I don't think you acquire ADHD. I don't think you acquire dyslexia. But if you broaden the definition of neurodivergence, you can acquire bipolar, for example, or you can acquire any number of other things that have, from a trauma point of view, your brain has had to rewire itself in order to recover. But I'm still new at this. I think again, I just go, right, well, let's focus on people's differences and the good stuff rather than how they got it or whether they and there's another point just that might be useful here, especially from a language point of view, that could trip you up is the have versus am language. So have is sort of like I have this as a condition, which is sort of person-centered, versus I am this, which is identity-centered. So I am autistic. I don't have autism. And the preference is really talking about identity-driven language. I think that would be the preferred comms moving forward, as far as I think if we started to accidentally say, oh, you have dyslexia, it is more of a pejorative, what's that word? Like it's a less positive, it's likely to probably trigger some people, particularly those who have spent a bit of time with their diagnosis. Anyone new might say, I have these things, but over time they will eventually get to the I am these things.
Time.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So how might someone support a team member that has disclosed their neurodivergence? So, I love a good Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, get curious, ask them questions. How does this play out for you? What works, what doesn't? Ultimately, what you want to do is understand that person's personalized best practice. Like, under what conditions or what environment do they work best? And let them tell you what is their preferred communication style, their preferred flexibility, their preferred instructions. Like, do they prefer to get instructions in written format? How much processing time, how much detail, and just get really curious about what that looks like. And then perhaps if you're a good leader, share your own preferences, right? Well, I actually prefer if you can communicate to me in short, sharp sentences, or can you provide this with that, you know, or I do have times of the week that I'd really rather not be interrupted because I'm preparing for an executive meeting or something like that. So I think the more that we share our own personal best practices, kind of makes it, so it's ways of working, right? Like, we all have our own individual ways of working, and it's understanding that and then accommodating for it.
It's got that vulnerability you need to authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. And then have a bit of fun with it. Oh, right, whoopsie, I forgot. I didn't realise that. Like, it's just exposing more humanness in that, you know, that I think everything, the devil's in the detail. Like, we're all humans. There's so much more to us than what we bring to work. If we just peel some of those layers back, there's a lot. I try and make it fun. Like, that's how I've always, whenever I sort of seem to trip someone up, I'd like make a joke about it and say, oh, whoops, I forgot to tell you, this is sort of, I'm really direct. I'm not trying to be rude. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are in such a unique position because you're in one really important part of that value chain that an employee experiences. You could be leading practice if you just give it some thought and take into consideration and do the research or get some help to think about where do you go and source talent from, and then how you go about presenting opportunities in a way that would appeal to them, and also giving options around how they might apply. So, you know, different forms of initial written applications might take a different format. It'd be particularly good if you can focus on sort of skills and experiences. And then interviews could be, an interview could be a walk around the park, or it could be at a coffee shop. But like, I'm not like so, you know, but it's just about ideas for looking at every part of that process and maybe asking some neurodivergent people, like, how would it work better for you? I'm starting to do some thinking, like some analysis into this sort of stuff, but like you guys could be best practice in that. And things like, you know, giving people the questions in advance and giving them time to process their answers. And do you want a whiteboard in the room? Would you like a fidget, you know, have fidget toys in the middle of the room, like have someone fidgeting, like just, there could be so many ways in which you make the process more innovative and bring out like that next layer that you can't always see when you're just doing that same format.
Well, historical practices have been to put people on to make them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Rather than comfortable.
Doesn't make any sense anymore, does it?
Yeah.
Because you're actually assessing their ability to be under pressure, not necessarily for the job that they've applied for.
Yeah. Right. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm going to be around for a drink, don't you worry.
So,
Thanks, AJ. Yes, she has.
There are drinks here, there's food here, so please stay and mingle. And thanks everyone for coming. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Ah.
It's good.
Yeah.
I like because we can